Thank you for tuning in to Movie Geeks United. They say that every dog has its day, and in the case of Showgirls, director Paul Verhoeven's critically reviled NC-17 Fleshfest, that day appears to be now, thanks to a legion of fans who have embraced it as an underappreciated classic, and the new documentary that explores the rethinking that has taken place around the film since its initial dismal release back in 1995. The documentary is called You Don't Nomi. Its director is Jeffrey McHale, and it's available on all digital platforms starting June 9th. We were able to speak with Jeffrey about his film last week.
When I discovered it, it was pretty late, and so it had already been out for 10 years, and so it had already kind of become a queer cult classic, and so I knew that there was this kind of fan base with it, but it never occurred to me to kind of sit down and watch it. And I feel like, the way that we see Showgirls is, a friend sits us down and says, you have to see this. And that's exactly what happened on my end. And, it was just one of those things that my mind was completely blown. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And I think still, there hasn't been a movie made like it ever since. And so, just the ways in which, just how bizarre and insane and over the top, and it's just so unique. And I think it's one of those films that, we're drawn to in this strange way, and it's hard to explain. And that was kind of what I've initially set out to do, was just kind of get a better understanding of my own fascination with it and why it's kind of connected with me over the years. And that's when I started to reach out and start reading and consuming everything that had been written about it. And I just loved reading all these kind of fascinating points of view about the film, the impact of the film, these personal relationships with the film, the people that have kind of shaped the conversation about it for the last 25 years. And so I started to reach out to them, and I thought, okay, like maybe there's something here there worth exploring. It seemed like kind of like the perfect opportunity. I'm a television editor by trade, and so it seemed like the perfect type of project that I could kind of tackle in my free time.
What fascinates me most about this whole phenomenon of kind of rethinking films that were critically and culturally lambasted at the time of their release and then later drew some appreciation is the connections between director intent at the time the movie was made, but then when the movie is released and it belongs to us, how we view it through the prism of our own experience, and how those two things can differ. So I wanted to start with director intent. Verhoeven, clearly he's a provocateur, and when you watch the film, you think to yourself, what was he thinking? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't have a great handle on what exactly he was thinking, because it seems like his story has changed over the years.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to look at, I found it fascinating, like to go over his book of essays, because that was kind of what I saw and others as like his closest account of what was in his mind and what was going through his head. And then looking at like the press interviews that he gave around the time, and him with Joe Esterhaus too, and it was fascinating to kind of hear them talk about it. And it's still hard. It's hard not to watch the film and feel like there is some sort of disconnect, and I think that's what makes it so appealing, and kind of the allure of Showgirls is kind of like trying to figure out what everyone was thinking and what their intent was. And I think that this is a perfect example of a film where it feels like it's almost impossible to kind of to pinpoint. And that was once I kind of stepped away from like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to figure out like what the intent was, but by kind of talking about how the film has lived and how we connect to it and the ways in which we are drawn to it. That's where the story is.
Yeah, but it's clearly the clearly the movie he set out to make. I mean, he's a very good director, and he orchestrated it to play at that pitch. I mean, nothing was kind of accidental.
Completely. Yeah. No, I don't think anything in there was accidental. I think probably what was maybe accidental would be maybe the way the way people responded to it, and how the things that they were drawn to and why. So I think that he's even said to this day, he thinks it's his most elegant film. He's still, he thinks the film's beautiful, and he speaks fondly about it, and it has kind of wavered a little bit on what what his intent was or what he was going for, and that it was refreshing to see him kind of take responsibility and own up to his direction, and specifically Elizabeth's performance, and I don't think any of that is anything is accidental.
Yeah, I mean, he's a smart filmmaker, and you, as you elucidate in your film, something like RoboCop, I mean, that was clearly a big budget Hollywood shoot 'em up action movie, and yet he used that genre to kind of address a subtext about a variety of things, from police state to the notion of violence in movies, and so if there is subtext in Showgirls, which is what your film is really about, the subtext that people see in it, could you give me, just to give our audience a sense of your film, a couple of, or one or two readings of the film? What are people seeing in the subtext of Showgirls that isn't obvious to the rest of us?
People, I think they, Adam Naiman has written, very in depth about Verhoeven and his intent and what he's doing as a filmmaker, and he has a great thread in his books and in the documentary about Verhoeven's use of mirrors and the kind of repetition of scenes and kind of the structure of the film. It has mirrored each other, and here you have Nomi and Crystal mirroring each other, and there is this of what we see. Verhoeven even said in his book, his intent is to hold a mirror up into society and to show American society, a version of themselves, however ugly it may be. And so I think that's kind of like one of the main threads that you can kind of see kind of running throughout the film.
Yeah.
And the fascinating one too, because you could see it visually, you can see it, you can see it in the structure. So I mean, once you kind of start looking for things like that, he's holding a mirror up to American society.
Yeah. And what was particularly interesting to me in your film is there's a reading on it from a young lady who suffered sexual assault, and she finds empowerment through the Nomi character, and through that journey. That's just one example. But in terms of the gay culture, through your exploration of this film, what have you found people see in it, in that community?
Well, as a member of that community, the biggest thing is when films like this is just one of the ways that we connect with each other, and we kind of through midnight screenings and kind of celebrations of the film. I think it's just one of a very long list of culture, film, music, of just the ways that the community connects with each other. And then, and specifically too, if looking at Nomi herself as a character, I never saw it this way until, one of my contributors, I found a video that he made, and he, asked him to be a part of the film. But, specifically, Nomi's journey aligns very closely with some gay people's experiences. It's like someone sets out to, follow their dreams, leaves their small town behind, moves to a big city, uses various ways, can use, sexuality to make connections, to get ahead, to just, explore explore that side of themselves. And that was, a very interesting kind of point of view on like a deeper level, a way that, we're drawn to the film, which, I think that most people might not see right away,
Yeah. There's also the kind of the subplot in the film of what became of Elizabeth Berkley due to the dismissal of this movie. And it just seems particularly cruel that this young actress gets a lead role in a major studio film, and she's haunted by it for the rest of her career. But there seems to be this outside community that has embraced Showgirls. Do you think that the makers of Showgirls feel some sense of redemption from that reception?
I would think, yeah. I mean, I guess, Paul and even Elizabeth, given interviews over the years, and I think they're very happy that it has this following, and they would much rather it be discussed and celebrated and talked about and watched than just to what they have said, like die on a video shelf somewhere. So I think that they appreciate that, and I know that just the comments and things from the last few years, just they embrace that, and I was actually at that screening in Los Angeles that's featured at the end of the film. I was one of those 4,000 people. I was all the way in the back, but when she stepped out, none of us had expected that to happen, and just to feel like you were there for a moment of film history was beautiful. And then just to hear her speak about this tonight would have been the first night that she experienced that film with a crowd of people that embraced it, and that like really stuck with me. And it was a beautiful moment, and it was great to see finally have that full circle moment for her, and then for the fans too, with the film, to see her there, kind of owning it, and it was just it was great.
It had to have been a moving night. Yeah, there's another film that's similar in style and ambition to this one, which is Room 237. And I remember years ago, we had the makers of Room 237 on the show before they started production, and we got them in touch with a couple of people that were actually in their movie. And so cool. It's an ambition that I empathize with. I think it's important to kind of reevaluate these movies through the prism of other people's experiences. But can you think of another film that, since something like The Shining or Showgirls, that fits that same purpose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I can't think. Room 237 was definitely one of the inspirations for this. I had coffee with Rodney kind of after I completed my interviews, and then kind of before I started editing, just to kind of see if he could kind of give me any advice, or kind of how to kind of approach this. And so he's been great, but I can't really think. The thing that I loved about that movie, the Room 237, it was it took all these, obviously it's a film that unquestionably is seen as a masterpiece, but I thought that taking that format and applying it to something like Showgirls, where there still is this kind of ongoing debate about its merits, and so I found that to be really interesting. But I can't think of like another. At least for me personally, there isn't another film that I would want to kind of approach in the same way,
Yeah.
But there are films that have followings, I think. like The Room comes to mind.
Right.
But and there have obviously been books written about that, and obviously Disaster Artist. But yeah, it's these films kind of take on their own life after the fact, and I think that it's just kind of interesting to see which ones we still talk about years and years later, and how we connect to them, and to kind of shift.
Do you think that we're still going to be talking about Showgirls in another 25 years, and do you think we'll be talking about it in a different way?
I mean, I can't predict what way we'll be talking about it, but yeah, I definitely think it's one of those films that we're not like my contributor Haley Melodic said, like we're still talking about it because we're not done with it. And so I think the minute we figure it out, or the minute we think we figured it out, or I think that society decides upon, like, okay, well, this is good, this is bad, or just kind of classifying it, then that's when I think kind of the conversations and the discussions stop. But I think the reason where we are still talking about it is because we haven't figured it out, and it means very different things to many different people.